Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am your host, Courtney Anderson. Thank you for joining me today. And as always, you can come to CourtneyAnderson.com for more information and to join in to our variety of different programs and resources available. So today we have a show that is part of our Help! Situation Spotlight series. And this is a series, of course, where people have asked for help. People have expressed questions, concerns, issues, and they've asked me about a topic or something related to a topic. And as I move through looking at creating the different show lists, I'll think, that's something that we might need to address. Maybe other people have that question, or it's something I've thought about and wonder about. I don't know. So here we are. And today, our Help Situation Spotlight, so it's a help issue, the situation that we're shining our spotlight on in today's episode is, how do I let go of my anger? How do I let go of my anger? How do I let go of my anger? And this is a really interesting show for me individually. One of the things that I do struggle with is letting go of anger. So when we look at potential solutions, when we look at working through this concept to try to explore, what's holding us back from surpassing our goals, it's something that this is one of the things that I really have on my, very high on my personal priority list. And I'm not really to a point where I can represent that I'm anger-free all the time. It just would be inaccurate. And I think that for those of us who this is a topic that is relevant to our lives, there's some important work that we have to do in terms of our honesty with ourselves first, and then moving out into honesty with other people and into the rest of our broader lives. But emotions in general are awesome. It's one of the interesting things about our entire species, sort of the range of emotions, the way we express them, whether it's artistically or through different artistic venues, music and art and poetry and sculpture and things of that nature. You don't see that necessarily in a lot of other species. You don't hear a lot of compositions or musical expressions necessarily. At least as such that we can access easily from other species. We don't see, paintings or movies or portraits or expressions of emotion from our other species. Again, that at least we can access or understand, to the best of my knowledge. That doesn't mean that there's not ever been any evidence that other species don't engage in expressing their emotions in a variety of ways. I'm just saying that at least from my species, specific perspective, which is understandable in some ways. This is what I know as I am in the species. It's what I've been exposed to the most, and I'm not an expert in a variety, or really any single other species that we are fortunate enough to share the planet with. But to the best of my understanding, there's some unique things about humans. Some of them come from or relate to this issue of our very strong emotional lives, not just the expressions of those externally, which I mentioned there through art and everything, but our internal emotional lives, the way that we process events, objects, the way that we relate them to our individual selves, and the way we attach meaning to things. Oh, this is really interesting. And often when I'll get frustrated, again, angry, with my own individual progress in terms of addressing anger or emotional regulation in general, I'll think about all the great benefits of being a human. About Homo sapiens are interesting. We're fascinating. I think. Of course, I'm biased. Other species are interesting and fascinating too. But I'm this, to the best of my knowledge, as I understand the world and myself as I know it, and these are some struggles. So what I'm trying to say is that, yes, many people struggle with different emotions, either the regulation of them, the expression of them, And I'm arguing in a larger sense that we should be appreciative and grateful that having these types of emotions, and that many times, even though it might be an individual challenge, that we all benefit, humanity benefits from someone else's anger or pain or frustration or emotional issues. So, and I'm trying to, again, and paint things in the most positive light, we should be really grateful and appreciative. It's a wonderful thing to be able to feel anything emotionally. The challenge is, as always, how does it impact our lives? So one of the reasons I said that I was aware, and I am aware, I hope, that anger is something I personally struggled with, is because I've had feedback. And I also have been able, at some level, not as accurately as I wish I could, but to understand that sometimes when I'm frustrated or express frustration, that's not the best way necessarily to obtain the outcome that I would desire. And I also understand that sometimes I've made decisions while in a very emotional state that haven't necessarily turned out to be the best outcome that I could have made if I wasn't at that moment in that highly charged emotional state. So those are some of the ways that I'm, thinking and figuring out and working through that anger is an issue, at least for me individually, and for the people who brought this show topic up. It's a real thing. And like anything else in life, right, I can't begin to fix it, if it's even possible, unless I at least first acknowledge it, right? So I'm sharing and acknowledging and doing some of this, and I hope that if you've joined me for this program that you are too, right? So this whole idea of letting go of the anger is fascinating, and so there's so many different ways to approach this, and for those of you who are frequent listeners, sometimes I come from more of a philosophical approach. Sometimes I come from more of a scientific approach. I just love thinking through these concepts and trying to come up with solutions. I think that often what we mean, at least in the United States, from our cultural perspective here, and in many parts of the West and the developed world, is we, sort of the idea that you can put things behind me, right? Like I can let go of, sort of like I can release, like a balloon, right? So I'm holding on to it, and then I'm going to let go of the balloon, I let go of the string, and then woo, there goes the balloon, it's floating away, and it's beautiful, and look how lovely it is. Hopefully, obviously, we have to be safe, because sometimes when we let things out into the world and then we don't look and see where they land, that, potentially it could be a hazard for some birds or other species, or even some humans. So I just want to mention that. But the idea of sort of, I've released it, right? So it's gone. I'm not carrying it. I'm not holding it. I'm not gripping it. It's no longer part of my thought process. It's no longer part of my world. It's out there, either floating or maybe a better visual. I'm at the water's edge, and I'm holding on, to this beautiful, little miniature little boat, and I put it in the water, and I just tap it and push it, and it moves with the current away. It's floating in the water, it's floating in the air. I don't care what visual you're using. The whole idea, right, is it's gone, it's released, it's no longer part of me, and now I'm unburdened by this anger, and I've moved on to do whatever it is I do, and I don't have any of this anger either clouding my judgment, resulting in me making poor choices in terms of the outcomes, resulting in me maybe having a negative ramification on other people, or in regards to other people, right? Like I've released this, so I'm no longer subject to this emotion, right? Dictating some of my choices and some of my behavior. I'm totally now I'm calm, and I'm rational, and I'm thinking through my good choices, and I'm getting better outcomes. That's kind of the idea, and it's a beautiful visual. I would argue from again mostly a U.S. cultural perspective, anger is a real challenge. I'm aware of it with myself, probably not as fully as I need to be, but I am aware of it, and I am taking a lot of steps to try to address it. I have, through the pleasure and privilege of my work, been able to witness what research shows is not just an isolated issue, that there are many people who have anger issues. I've been practicing law since 1998. And over those many years, I've had the opportunity in many settings. So sometimes people have, criminal outcomes, criminal legal cases as an outcome due to the anger, right? So they're angry, and then they destroy property, or they, worse well, sometimes equally or worse. They might physically hurt another person out of anger, so the criminal charges. So I've represented people in those settings. I've represented people in family law cases where maybe there's a child custody issue or divorce. I've represented people in other family law issues related to somebody passing away and dying, and that's called probate, when we go to court to see who gets what from grandma, right? Grandma died, and now we have to figure out who gets her stuff. I've seen anger expressed in these family cases, actually more so than in criminal cases, I think, because people have more emotions about family stuff, issues, because it goes to the core of who we are, right? Right? You know, who did grandma love the most? You know, grandma's dead, so we're arguing over things, but typically what we're really arguing over is emotion. It doesn't really matter about the stuff, right? It's typically just, the stuff is just a representation of the feeling of whether or not we felt our needs were met by grandma, you know, or dad or grandpa or uncle or whoever. And so those cases are fraught with really heavy emotion and lots of anger that's expressed through, you know, inappropriate language and, you know, just a lot of negative ramifications. But it touches the core of who you are. And, you know, also to a little bit lesser extent, in my experience, you see it in family cases, family law, so divorce. Not so much that people, again, it looks, you know, they're arguing over stuff, but it's really not the stuff. They don't really care who gets the couch or the sofa. What they're really upset about is, you know, what does it mean that I thought, you know, that somebody would love me forever, and they promised they would. You know, they made a promise, and now they said they don't want that promise to continue. What does that mean? You know, does that mean that I'm a bad person? Does it mean they're a bad person? Does it mean I'm unlovable? Why would they promise that and then promise forever, and now they don't mean it? So it's all this sort of core. It triggers, I think it touches a lot of the core issues of who am I? Do I have any value in the world? And because we can't go to court and file legal motions on, you know, why don't you love me? I mean, it's just not something that the law can, you know, even quantify, right? You know, what does it mean that they love you? And how much is enough, right? Sometimes, you know, in these probate cases, I've been to court where, you know, the question isn't who did, you know, grandma or grandpa or, who, you know, love, but how much did they love me? Did they love them more, right? Because they got more stuff, or they got better stuff, or they got things that got more value. You can't go to court and ask another person to begin to determine, describe even, or met out these things like love and value, right? And so these court proceedings trigger the deepest, you know, recesses of our own struggles, you know, with our identity. You don't go to court over these things and get angry if you feel like, oh, you know, I feel so awesome. You know, I've been loved and nurtured and supported. I feel there's unconditional love whenever I need it. I feel like no matter what I do in life, no matter what kind of horrible decisions I make, I've got, you know, these people or this person that will always love me, has always loved me, and I wake up every day aware of that. It makes me feel good about myself even when I feel horrible. I know that if, you know, I ever need anything, I can go to them, and there they are. They hug me or pat me on the back and tell me how special I am, and I know that they'll do everything they can to protect me and keep me safe, and I just feel great about that. And now I'm going to go to court and argue and scream over, you know, who gets what. You don't see that. My perception is that you see people who are going to go and spend tons of time and money in legal systems because they don't have that base of, you know, I'm unconditionally loved and supported, and no matter what I do, I'm awesome, and I feel good about myself because I know I have value, because if I didn't have value, why would these people, you know, give me all this unconditional love and support? You don't see that. Obviously, also, if you had that, you probably wouldn't have people who are fighting to begin with, because if they all had that, right, if every grandchild felt that, then we're not going to court about who grandma gave what to, because we already feel awesome, right? We loved grandma. She loved us. She was awesome. We were awesome. We're still awesome. All the love she's given us, so much love and support. It doesn't matter who gets what, because she already gave us so many wonderful things, and we feel good about ourselves, and we don't need money, and we don't need emotional support or attention or anything. So we're definitely not even going to be in court. I don't see those people as a lawyer. I see everybody else, the majority of people, who there's some unmet need, and the unmet needs trigger emotional responses, which often are expressed as anger. Some would argue, and I tend to agree with it, the anger is, you know, it's just pain, right? Just how you express it. So something bad could happen, and of course that's relative. right? So what's bad to one person is horrible. The other person, somebody else, is nothing. And I had a horrible death of the person closest to me in my life a few years ago, and it was, honestly, we won't delve into all that here, but it was, really, really horrible, and the person was really young, and and they left, by their own volition. It was a suicide, and so I'm all, feeling all these things, and the person, the next day, I think it was that day or the next day or something, said something to me along the lines of, oh, I lost a pet too, like something, like I can't remember, a dog or a cat, and it was, I think they were trying to equate it, and it angered me. I remember it, right? Like, I'm angry now. And it's about pain, right? And like I said, it's relative. So someone could think, oh my gosh, I had a pet rabbit, and my pet rabbit has died, and now it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And they're not lying. That may be literally the most painful, horrible thing that's ever happened to them. In their entire lives, nothing's ever happened that horrible. Where there's somebody else who you tell that story to, and they'd say, are you serious? I lost my family in a horrible, plane crash right in front of me. They melted, and died. And somebody else would say, oh, that plane crash, that's nothing. I was a prisoner of war, and tortured and killed, and my family and friends were killed and tortured in front of me, and I was tortured, for years, and you're complaining about a simple plane crash. And then somebody else would say, really? That thing where you were tortured and killed, and that was it? I was in a civil war where 800,000 people died in like 90 days. Every single person in my entire area, not just all of my family, all of my friends, all of my teachers, everybody in my whole area, they were all killed in front of me, and I saw it. And we could all win. It's like the pain Olympics. Sometimes it's referred to, because that'll trigger anger, right? So the person who's like, yeah, but my rabbit died, right? Like, this is real to me. I'm in the most horrible pain I've ever been in my whole life. That's the only thing that's ever died. I've never said anything so sad. And then the person, in the middle rungs is like, what do you mean that's nothing? What about my plane crash, or what I was, tortured and my family was killed? And the other person's like, are you serious? All you lost was your family? Or, geez, I lost, literally whole villages. Hundreds of thousands of people died. Nobody wins these things. And what tends to happen, I think, when we go down this path, we get more entrenched in anger, because everybody feels more hurt, right? The anger, I'm arguing, is pain, right? They feel like this bad thing happened to them, and then on top of the bad thing happening, that they're not even getting any attention or empathy or care or anything at that point, whether it's the rabbit or the people who died in the plane crash or the people were tortured and killed or the people in the genocide. Like, everybody's madder because they feel like, what? And this is not helping let go of it. So as I said at the beginning, I may not necessarily have, quote, the answer really to anything, because what we do is explore potential solution sets. But definitely I know this. The pain Olympics is the wrong way to go. No matter what it is that's happened to you, and this is something that actually has helped me not necessarily let go of the anger, but integrate the anger. Meaning bring it, do you push it away, right? Let it go and float in the water, or put it in the balloon in the sky, or do you bring it, pull it in closer to you? Do you integrate it in a way that's healthy, so you can learn from it and maybe get some of the positive benefits of whatever the painful, horrible thing was, and maybe in some way learn from it? And one of the ways is I strongly can advise, and this help situation spotlight, is the worst thing you can possibly do is get into the plane Olympics, trying to get madder that other people claim that, whatever it is wasn't that bad, or that other people don't seem to care. Part of the reality is this: no matter what happens to you or I, the world is so much larger than we are. Not just in numbers, not just the billions of people on the planet, but, the world literally can't stop just because we're in all this pain. And it doesn't even matter if it's the most horrible thing ever. Literally, we've had, in the last several decades, many instances where just untold atrocities have happened to huge numbers of people. There's some happening right now on this planet as we are making this show. We won't gain anything individually or collectively by thinking, why doesn't the world stop? Don't they see this? Yeah, parts of the world, they do see it. Some people don't see it at all, right? Since some other part of the world never heard of it, they don't pay attention, they don't care. But I would suspect that until the last of our species dies out, that whoever remains keeps it going. They're just going to keep going. So even though, our rabbit died, or our closest relatives, or the most horrible thing happened in our world, yeah, the rest of the world goes on. that causes us pain, right, when we're grieving or in a situation like that. But part of what we have to do, I think, to be able to maybe more healthily integrate the pain that in our lives that we express as anger sometimes is to begin to, get a better, you need more data. And that sounds like maybe a horrible answer. But what I mean is this: if all I know and all I think about is myself all the time, then I get distorted results because in the language of research, I have a small sample set, right? In other words, my experience is my experience. It's all I know. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's, quote, right. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's universal. It just means it's all I know. If I don't go out and learn anything else about what else is happening in the world, then I'm just limited to my own little life experience, which is always going to be just a tiny sliver of what's possible. So the only way that we can begin at all to change anything in our lives is to begin to get more information. I've done other programs where we talk about, expanding our opportunities, and you got to get out there and see what the world's about so you can expand the way that you think about things. It's always, that cliche is somebody from one little small town or village and they've never left the town or village, and you go and you talk to them and you're shocked that they are so narrow in their thinking, and they'll tell you, oh, it's so horrible and everything's horrible, and it's like, yeah, it is horrible in this little village, but you could just go somewhere else, on the bus or train or walk or whatever, and there's great opportunity in other places, and that's kind of the myth we get around the world, right? The person who goes out into the world, whether it's in modern times, or in the past, right? America, from some perspectives, not the people who were native to the land originally, but from certainly the European perspective, was, quote, discovered. Now, it wasn't discovered. It was here, and people already lived here. But other people didn't know it existed because they thought the world was flat, and they didn't understand that there was more to the world on the other side of the water. And when somebody went out there and saw it, they were like, wow. And then some people, for, sort of the more positive spin, were like, oh, okay, I'm going to leave where I am. It's not super awesome here. I'm going to go somewhere else. Maybe I'll get rich, maybe not, but I'm going to take the risk. They go out in the world and they make their own way. And you have that in modern times. People from all over the world, go out in the world to see what's out there. And so what's the point of this? The point is that you got to go out in the world. If you just sit in your own head and keep thinking about the things that cause you all the pain and the anger, well, then there's no way that you're possibly going to get a different outcome. You can't let go of it. You can't integrate it in a healthy way. You're just going to sit in it and stew. And one of the things that I think, for me, that's really instructive with this topic of the anger is I do struggle, and I've said at the outset, but I also have witnessed other people, either through my work or in my personal lives, especially, people that were, generations older than I am, that struggled with this, I think, my perception, and that have since, left this earth as we know it, and I don't think all of them necessarily may be left happy. I think sometimes if we decide we're going to sit and stew in anger, and then we make the decision and we do that, then we also usually share that and spread that anger with other people. And that's a legacy. It's not necessarily I would think, the ideal legacy. And sometimes when I work with senior leaders and executives, I talk a lot about this, because once you get past the point of sort of your basic needs, right? Like, I have to work for money, I need a place to stay. Once you kind of get to the point where you have a lot of financial independence or total financial independence, then what do you work for? And most people work for a legacy. You don't need the money. You already have all the money you could ever, imagine. So what are you doing? Well, it's about your legacy. How well can you run this company or this university or this country? What are you doing? And I'm going to argue that with us. When we look at our anger, what's our legacy? I don't necessarily think that we're going to let go of the pain because it's with us, and I think to a large degree it shapes us. Ideally, when we go through these things in life, we should learn from them. I'm not saying learn and say, oh, wow, I'm so grateful that happened. It was horrible, but look at how much I learned. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is it did happen, and if you accept that it happened, what do you do with it? I don't think you should ignore it and pretend it didn't happen. A few years ago, I was fortunate enough, I was at I don't remember what type of event, but there was a woman who came and spoke to the group, and she had been in Rwanda when they had their genocide just a few years ago. Well, now it's coming up on several decades, but it's, in the 90s, right, the early 1990s, and somewhere around 800,000 people died in 90 days, like 3 months. It's just mind-boggling. And there were tribal differences, and it was stoked by, political issues and other issues. But the numbers of dead is not anything that no one can go in there and say that nothing happened, right? Now, the exact number is debatable, as it always is in these things, but to me, that's not the issue. And so anyway, she was living in the U.S. at the time, and this was in the U.S., and she told a story, and it was sort of what you would envision or what you could access online if you're interested, right? She's a survivor, so everybody that she knew, everybody in her family, they're all tortured and killed in these horrible ways. And I'm not sitting here saying, like, isn't that wonderful because she learned to go out and give these speeches, and no. I'd much rather that never happen. It's a horrible thing. These are horrible things. What I'm saying is she's alive. What is she going to do with that? If she stays in that space and doesn't expand her, mind, maybe, have different experiences, if she just sat in that same space in her mentally, where do you put all that pain? Where do you put it all? If your family, your friends, everybody that you knew and loved and cared is not just dead, but you saw them killed and mutilated or tortured or raped or whatever, like, where do you put that? It'll consume you. And that's why when we look at the anger and we look at these outcomes, whether it's someone that lived their life and never really dealt with it, and that's all their only legacy is how angry and mean and full of pain they were. And we look at ourselves and we look at people, and I've done other programs on this, right, where we look at somebody who's either, usually a celebrity or famous for something, and you think, wow, they're famous and, usually rich, or they were rich. Why would they voluntarily, hurt themselves or abuse drugs and alcohol or whatever? Because a lot of times there's pain. And what do we do with the pain? We either just leave it right where it is, and it's going to continue to exact a toll. It might be that we only hurt ourselves. It might be that we don't go out and hurt other people at work or hurt other people in our family. It might be we just leave it to, we just keep it inside. But then we decide we want to hurt ourselves. We still can't stand it. It's too much to tolerate. So some people, abuse drugs and alcohol to try to escape themselves, right? Some of the pain is legitimately something that happened was way beyond our control. Some of the pain sometimes is part of what we've done or derived totally from what we've done. Maybe we made bad choices that resulted in bad outcomes. And owning that is horrible. So, how do you let go of it? I don't know if we ever let go of it. There's all types of programs, religious and spiritual and psychological and all types, and counseling and all kind of things. And there's all types of arguments. Some people say the best way to deal with this stuff is you never think about it. You just put it in a little box in your mind, and you close the box, and you throw the box in your back of your closet, and you just go and think about other stuff. Okay. If it works for some people, all right. Other people would say that never works because it's in there locked up, and it's there. And so it's going to still be there. And one day it's going to pop out of the box, and it's going to create kind of problems. Other people say you need to go all the way, go toward the anger, pull it closer to you, sit in it, feel it, talk about it, work through it. What does work through it mean? I'm not ever actually totally sure. I think what they mean is process it. So instead of somebody pretending like, oh, this horrible thing happened and I never, think about it, that's usually not true. Then I think work through it means that you express, like, this horrible thing happened. I want to talk about what the horrible thing is. I want to talk about how I felt. I want to talk about how it's impacted my life, all that. There's so many different suggestions. What works for you is going to work for you. How do you know what's working for you? Well, how's your life? How do you feel about yourself? I'd start with that. I'll be very fair that there are things that happen and people that do things, whether it's, in my personal life or clients, that I don't think I'll ever come to a point and say, yeah, that client I had that admitted they, raped that young child, yeah, I'm just going to let that go, or, assimilate that where I don't think it's a horrible thing. I don't think that that's accurate. There's a lot of debate, and there's interesting things like concepts, restorative justice, this whole idea that it's helpful for people who've made those choices sometimes, that they've created, pain and destruction in other people's lives. Somebody went out, drove a vehicle, they were intoxicated, and they knew they were intoxicated, and they still drove, drunk or intoxicated, and they hit and killed somebody else. So restorative justice ideas, they sit in the room with the survivors of the, the loved ones, family, and friends of the people they killed, and let those people talk to them, and then they, tell the people they're sorry. And some of these things sometimes can be, people report, make them feel better. The key is, how do you feel about yourself? Let's start with that. And they've got programs for people who are offenders in prisons to try to help them come up with better choices. Because the thing is, if you get stuck in the thing, whether it was done to you or you did it or whatever, then you never can get anywhere else. And in a very simplistic sense, you just sit in that anger. The years will go by, but nothing will change. And you'll either hurt yourself and hurt other people, or you'll just hurt yourself, or you'll just hurt other people. But why not stop hurting other people and hurting yourself? The first place to start is stop hurting yourself. I think part of what we can do to deal with some of the anger, and one of the things we're putting, all types of different programs out constantly is, sometimes you need to say no to those things or those people or those places that have created the pain and still will create the pain if you stay there. Sometimes you do need to physically be in a different place or mentally be in a different place and start saying yes to yourself. And I would close with this, that, my argument is that the pain to some large rudimentary degree comes from pain, right? Where does the pain come from? Well, often from some sort of core unmet need, right? You feel that you're not valuable. You feel that you don't matter. You feel that no one cares about you. You feel unloved. And the reality is sometimes you are unloved. Sometimes I hear people say, well, there's someone who loves you and cares about you. Not always. There are a lot of people that I know. There is nobody that's alive that does love or care about them. And that's okay. That leaves basically you start with the one option we all have, us. And it's, again, another cliche. And I've done other programs on that, right? How do I care about other people or love other people, when I don't love myself? Where do I start with that? So I've done some programs on different aspects of that. But the core of the anger is the pain is there. You need to figure out what works for you so that at the end of the day, yeah, you're aware of it. You know what happened. But how do you treat yourself? Are you kind to yourself? And the outgrowth of how you treat yourself should be how you treat other people. And is there anything at all you can learn from this? Even if the basic thing is, okay, myself, I won't go out and, drive drunk. That's not much to learn, but I did learn something, And what do you do with whatever time you have left? What's your legacy? But these things aren't, you don't flip a switch to the best of my knowledge and they're magically fixed. This is a work in progress because you're a work in progress. But I strongly advise you, if this is a thing that you think about, the anger, that you would begin to ask yourself these really hard questions. Okay, what's the real underlying pain, and what can you do with what you have today, not a fantasy life in the future if everything changed or somebody came along and, changed your life or cared about you. But today, what can you do today? What can you do to show yourself you have value? What can you do to be kind to yourself? Just start with that. And then you also at the same time I would strongly suggest start cutting back to some point of minimizing exposure to the people that are maybe continuing to inflict pain, because you'll never get out of it if you just stay in the same place and keep letting people dump more pain on you when you're already dealing with existing pain and you're already trying to ask yourself how you can let go of the anger. Then you have to at least stop them from adding new pain. Just cut that off, right? Till we get to maybe a different place in life where we're able to then say, all right, now I'm able to handle more pain. Okay, thank you so much for joining me. As always, you can come to CourtneyAnderson.com, and I appreciate your time.